So I can even, maybe I can even give you an example of that. This is a hard one, but I'll try. In the Pinocchio movie, this also happens in Jonah, the story of Jonah. Remember, Geppetto ends up in a whale. It's like, what the hell? There's no explanation for that in the story. It's like he's out looking for Pinocchio and now he's in a whale. Well, a whale is a giant carcass, right? And so when something dies, its spirit, what would you say? Its spirit is then embedded in a carcass. That's a good way of thinking about it. That's why Pinocchio has to go into the belly of the whale to free Geppetto and finish his transformation, is that when things deteriorate, right, you have these carcasses lying around with their dead spirits. The spirit of what gave rise to them is still inside there. And the job is to go into the carcass and to revitalize the spirit that produced it and not to parasitize it. Right.
Boy, I don't know how you got that out of Pinocchio and the whale.
Well, I have to put, sorry, whales, carcasses. No, but you understand, right? You understand what I mean. I'm surprised because Joe's claimed that he has a bullshit detector, built in. It's neat. It's proprietary. He doesn't actually need DLC or upgrades or anything, but he's got a bullshit detector. And he's had Jordan Peterson on so many times when Jordan Peterson has been spewing just some of the most flagrant bullshit possible to a degree that I know even Joe knows, right? Like this is stuff I know it's sometimes tricky because of the word salad, right? It's one thing to be like, I don't believe in climate science, but it's a totally different one to be like, well, the postmodern neo-Marxists are basically trying to stop our abundance agenda and they're going to reduce us to nothing. It's Malthusianism, and I say it at its worst case. Right. Yeah, but at the end of the day, the scientists who kind of conclusively agree on climate change have pointed out that they never said the world was literally going to end in 2022. They actually pointed out to a lot of things that were going to happen that have all kind of come to pass,
Whether or not it was his blood that was at the scene of the crime, and some of the blood found at the scene of the crime had that preservative in it that they use. They were sloppy in the 90s,
Compared to now.
Well, there was no DNA evidence back then. Cops were there. There's always going to be a certain percentage of cops that just want to convict somebody regardless of the evidence. And if they're, in their mind, they believe someone's guilty, they'll do whatever they can, including planting.
When DNA evidence starts being introduced into trials, obviously because it's a newer form of acquiring evidence, there's a lot of ways you can poke holes into it from, a defense standpoint. But that's different than saying it didn't even exist.
Evidence, I guess. At least that's allegedly. Not that I don't think he did it. I definitely think he did it. But I also think the cops planted evidence, which is probably at least partially why he got off. I think the big reason why he got off was Rodney King, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
For a second there, I was like, Joe, he may have watched a documentary at some point or another because he's learned a little bit here, but then it just reverts back to it was Rodney King, right? We can do white guilt. Yeah, that's why.
Yeah. Have you gone into the whole George Floyd story at all? Have you ever looked at?
Oh God, I'm literally 30 seconds into this.
What they actually did to him. It's a combination of things. What the cop did was horrible, but also he was dying. Most people probably
What the fuck? He needs one person to come on the show, just one guest with half of a working brain cell, someone who has not been consumed by the worm, to be able to sit across from him and be like, yeah, Joe, that shouldn't matter if a person is on drugs, that cops should not be able to murder them. You'd agree, right? Seeing that you're on drugs right now, should a police officer be able to kick the door in, grab you, and strangle you to death? That would probably be pretty fucked up. Now, I could say, well, he's no innocent boy, that Joe, though. He was stoned out of his mind. He was drinking whiskey. He was smoking blunts. The guy was fucked up, all right? I'm sure that contributed to it, right? Couldn't have been the perfect state to get strangled in. Was not ideal, optimal, if you will. But, at the end of the day,
if they did that to you, you probably would have lived. That guy had an large heart. He was fucked up. But that cop did lean on his neck. What it is.
Well, that situation can be ugly in a multitude of ways.
Yeah.
Right. That's when things get well,
Obviously.
that's when it's very difficult to pick your moral pathway forward.
Oh, of
All your
course.
choices are
Yeah.
not good.
Yes,
Right.
which is oftentimes the case when it comes to.
How the fuck do you take this perspective? It's got to be because you're just talking to right-wingers all day. Because you are on drugs right now. You do drugs. You do drugs live on your show all the time. Like, that shouldn't change the basis of whether or not a cop is allowed to execute you.
Conflicts, right?
Yes.
Conflicts are very complicated, and people want it to be binary. They want there to be a good guy and a bad guy, and that's oftentimes not really the case.
Well, it's hard to organize yourself for combat unless you are quite convinced that you're the good guy. So there's a default to that dichotomy that's a necessary part of, well, even standing your own ground, right? Because otherwise you get demoralized. And so I suppose people, well, when they're threatened, they default to a simple narrative, and because you can't defend yourself. In some ways, it's very hard to defend yourself, especially physically or militarily, without a pretty cut and dried narrative.
Well, especially like military operatives, you have to have a very your life and the people that you're with, their life depends on you not having any confusion about whether or not it's morally
totally.
correct to be doing what you're doing. That's why they like to break it down to kill bad dudes. Kill bad dudes.
Right.
Real simple. Let's go. They tell us what to do, we do it. Which is what you want to stay alive. You want your teammates to stay alive. That's what you have to do.
Yeah, well, you never know when doubt.
Unreal that you just brought up George Floyd, Derek Chauvin having, killed him. And then in that same context, be like, yeah, and it's weird sometimes how like in the military, they try to train you, right? Like dehumanize your enemy kind of idea. And then it's just like, you got to do whatever you got to do to stay alive. But it's like, who exactly are you killing? You got to tell people it's someone who's bad, right? Yeah, you got to really frame them as just the bad guy. It doesn't matter where you are. You could be in Iraq and then all of a sudden you're killing children. And then you're like, well, no, but they could have been potential terrorists or helping terrorists. It's a fucked up thing. Yeah, totally. But the thing with George Floyd is interesting because like, he wasn't a good guy, was he? That's right, he wasn't. And he may have been high at the time. True. I mean, it's complicated. It's complicated. It's a tough thing, Where do you land on that one?
Will cause a fraction of a second difference in reaction time.
Oh, yeah. That's always the thing with physical altercations with people, too. Oftentimes people get sucked into these things where they're not sure whether to act or not act, and that's when they get in trouble.
Right.
Right.
That's probably true in life. You don't want to oversimplify things too, but once you've made a decision, well, that's when it's necessary to put doubts behind you, because otherwise you just act in half measures.
Yeah, and oftentimes you have to have done the wrong thing before, like failed to act or hesitated to act, and it cost you. And then you have to learn that lesson. It's very difficult to know that without experiencing mistakes. You have to have failed to act and then realize, oh, I should have done something there.
Yeah,
Profound.
well, I think that's partly too one of the things that I often faced in my
I think you two are the
clinical
first to ever
practice, and
realize
with the
this.
students that I mentored, was this confusion about acting. I don't know what to do, so what should I do? Well, nothing. I'll wait around until I figure out what to do. It's like, no, you should put together a bad plan and you should implement it, because even if you fail in the implementation, you'll gather information. And then you can rectify the plan.
Terrible instructions. I don't know whether or not I should do something. Well, you should do something terrible, and then you'll learn from that, is what I would do.
Plan. And so staying in that malaise until you know what to do makes you get older and more miserable, and you gather no information along the way. A bad plan is a good idea. Best,
Cool.
Any plan is better than none. That's a good rule of thumb. And a bad plan.
Why don't you just say every slogan that comes to your mind right now, and you can fill 3 hours of this.
Can be incrementally improved.
Yeah.
Right? With experience.
Right. He who hesitates is lost.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really difficult for young people. I think more so today than ever at any time in history, because the distractions are so many and they're so engrossing. If you get out of high school, you don't know what to do, and then you start playing video games and you're on social media, a day can slip by like that.
Yeah.
A day becomes a week, becomes a month, becomes a year, and before you know it, you're 30.
Yeah, right.
And you
That's
haven't
for
done
sure.
shit.
Yeah.
And that's really common. That's really
Just
common
gooning.
today. And I
All
don't
day
think we can
gooning.
ignore those factors, the factors of just engrossing distractions.
Yeah, well, and the algorithm's optimized for short-term attention. So,
Yeah.
it's a weird thing, because you could imagine that you would want a machine that offers you what you want, right? Because you want ads that are targeted to you, because you want to see a bunch of ads that aren't relevant to you now and then, because maybe you'll learn something. And content, well, why not have a machine shovel the same sort of things that you are interested in at you?
Yes.
That's a kind of curation. The problem comes, and we haven't figured this out at all technically, and probably not psychologically, the problem comes in time frame, right? Because there's a big difference between what you might be interested in if you were diligently striving towards a long-term goal that required conscientiousness, and what's going to attract your attention right now, this moment.
Right.
And the thing about the algorithms,
I love how it's like we've never figured this out. We just don't have the technology. No, we have a really in-depth understanding of how this works. The reason they do it is to try and get you to be as incendiary and content generating as possible, to keep you as addicted as possible to the platforms, because it generates them the most attention. And an attention commodity, that makes perfect sense. Under capitalism, it's all very explainable. Quite easy, actually. It's not like, no, it's a good thing. It's a good thing if you get targeted ads, they're targeted to you because you might learn something, bucko. That one's great. But then at the same time, it's just basically like, you would think it would be positive for us to be receiving information that we're interested in. This guy is so addicted to social media. He has such a posting problem. I'm not going to get into the whole, like, cock milking fetish porn stuff, but like, he clearly spends hours a day on Twitter replying and quote tweeting and getting angry. And he's one of those like every minute type guys, like Elon Musk tier, just like post, especially if there's something political going on. Like he's had relatives tell him like it's unhealthy, we need to take the phone away from you. His own daughter during the cock milking fetish porn stuff had to be like, oh my God, Dad, stop. Like, what are you doing?
so that they maximize for short-term attention. And so basically they're actually optimizing for hedonism.
Yeah.
And then you might say, well, so what? Because you're getting what you want. Well, the problem with short-term impulsive hedonism.
I wish they were optimizing for hedonism, all right? I wish the algorithms, for some reason, instead of showing me just like horrifying shit all the time, were showing me just like horny stuff. And I'm like, wow, the algorithm's very horny today. That's unusual. It's just really sending me a lot of things that I absolutely are not following or have any interest in. Unfortunately, a lot of it seems to be directed towards what it thinks will effectively get me the maddest and the most engaged online. And it works, because then I'm like, well, I gotta reply to fucking Steven Crowder. I can't believe he said this bullshit. Look at this, everyone. Ah, shit, I'm part of the problem.
It doesn't play out well over any reasonable time span.
Yeah.
Right? So that's why you have to mature, which is painful and annoying, but absolutely necessary and much better than the alternative. And the alternative is exactly that's Peter Pan, right?
Yeah.
30-year-old, I still haven't grown up, and I'm a little past my shelf life now, too.
I think people are afraid of losing.
In what world? Dude, isn't he in his 60s? Like, you already know this. Being 30 is not your life is over. That's such a weird perspective. I know people who have gone back to school for the first time and started a career trajectory to become physiotherapists when they were 35 years old. Yeah, it took them until they were 40 to finally be like, certified, pass the board, and now working, but they're doing what they wanted to do, and now they're happy. And like, it could happen at any point. Like, you don't need to oh yeah, you're 30, there's no opportunity for you left, I mean, your life is over, especially for women. I mean, their eggs are gone.
Losing fun. They think that when you grow up you lose fun, but it's silly. It's not true. You can grow up and still
hell yeah,
have fun.
Pogs in a blanket.
You just have to have discipline and prioritize your time.
Well, that's why Christ says to people that they have to become as little children, not stay. Right, you have to rediscover that.
Rediscover the joy of it. Yeah, but
well,
also
kids are good for that too, aren't they? Because they teach you that again. You look at the world through eyes of memory by the time.
How do people listen to this? I got 3 hours to go. I'm just going to do it in chunks, because I'm sure they're going to pick on a relevant modern topic at some point, right?
Someone who at one point in time you loved intimately, and now that person is trying to destroy every aspect of your life, and you have to pay for their lawyers.
Yeah, that sucks. It could happen in both directions, by the way, just so you know. It also would be unfortunate to be a woman and be madly in love with a man, and then you hate each other, and then that man starts to try and destroy your life. Add in scary stalking and guns into the mix, and things get quite horrifying.
So you have to pay for the general of the army that's trying to destroy your
Peace
kingdom.
Right Now. Everyone check out Peace Right Now.
And I've seen this happen to many of my friends. And that is why people are afraid of marriage. That's why people are afraid of commitment. Because the disastrous implications of like, what can happen if it goes sideways? Like, what can happen if you wind up...
Well, that's the weird thing. It sounds like your friends do some fucked up shit, because like, I don't know anyone who's like, I don't want to get married because eventually I know my wife will become evil and a pariah and try to destroy my life when she finds out the secret. That doesn't really happen. I mean, if you're really worried about the potential financial implications of being in a long-term relationship with someone, you could always look into things like a prenup, if that's something that just like really terrifies you. Oh, I'd totally go on a date with you. I just don't want in 4 years to have to like propose to you, and potentially we get married, and then at that point you become evil and vindictive and viperous, and then you're going to basically try and destroy my life. So I gotta avoid all that. I'm sorry, but a date did sound nice, right?
Hating each other. And what can happen if you just lie to yourself and you trick you? Like, well, some of the hesitation that I had for getting married is most of my friends that got married when I was young all went through horrible divorces. When I was on news radio, Dave Foley, Stephen Root, and Phil Hartman were all going through it in different levels of psychosis.
Yikes.
Obviously, Phil Hartman's being the worst because his wife shot him when he was leaving her, by the way.
I was like, don't use the Phil Hartman story to justify your weird takes on women and divorce now. That's just gross.
He decided to leave her, and he tried to leave her a few times, and she shot him in his sleep, and then she shot herself. It's a horrible, horrible story. But Stephen Root went through it, and they'd confide in me. I'd be like, oh.
Yeah, that's not at all indicative of a thing that commonly happens to people where they have partners who are using vast amounts of drugs and also have a variety of different, undiagnosed mental problems. And at the same time, like, this is not a generality that you should bring up when someone's like, so, a lot of women are, like, kind of taking advantage of dudes, right? No, totally. I got to tell you the specific case I know about my close friend, Phil Hartman. Like, fuck off.
Get set up where your ex-wife wants a percentage of what you're making.
This is a very specific demographic of people. You got to realize this. The average person is not trying to become a famous actor. And you're like, yeah, so all my friends who also happened to be on the sitcom that I was filming, which was very successful before each of us went on to do bigger and bigger projects afterwards, all of them went through a similar pattern where they got married when they were first not as famous, then became super famous. And that exposure through being famous made them lead to cheating on their wives and girlfriends. And then their girlfriends and wives left them. And then at that point, the divorces were really, really nasty, I got to tell you. So I'm thinking all women do that, right? And this is the problem with relationships in general. And that's why the birth rates are low. You got it?
At this very unrealistic level where you're never going to achieve this again. And for Dave Foley, it was so bad that at one point in time, I don't believe he was allowed to go back to Canada. I don't know if that's changed, but the judge literally told him, when he told the judge, like, I don't have that kind of money anymore. I don't have the potential for earning. I was on a hit sitcom, like not even a hit sitcom, but I was on a sitcom on NBC, paid a lot of money, and that was the only time I made that kind of money. The judge said to him, your obligation to pay has no
This is also really mean because, like, Dave Foley has done a ton of shit afterwards, right? Like, I'm not denying that him and Joe were friends. They were probably close, and that he may have gone through a very messy divorce, and part of that messy divorce had a whole bunch of things associated with it. I'm not saying all that, but I'm just saying to imply that, like, that was the peak of Dave Foley's career, basically. He was on news radio, and then, yeah. Not much else.
relation to your ability to pay. That's Canadian judges for you. Just insane.
Oh, it was a Canadian judge. It was a Canadian judge who was telling him that he wasn't going to be allowed back into Canada. I don't think so. What was it? An exile? Your divorce is so bad. It has insulted the Queen herself. You will not be returning to the Kingdom of Canada. AK, thank you so much for the dono. What the hell is wrong with conservative straight men? I've never seen alpha males so afraid of women. I know. It's utterly bizarre. Like, for the dudes, of course there are women who are mean. It's not all women. Like, it's the same thing when people say, like, oh man, every man is an idiot. Every single man is a fucking violent offender, blah, blah, blah. Yes, some men are, and you want to call out those men. Just like there are women who want to call out the women who treat men poorly. It's just like, if someone's being shitty in general, you most likely, unless you are also in agreement with that shitty behavior, would want to call it out. Doesn't matter who it is. It's just a weird thing to be like, in these very specific cases involving other fellow celebrities, their relationships didn't work out, so that's why marriage is dangerous. And it's like, well, I don't think you can really speak to the average person's life experience, Joe.
You know,
those are words you never want to hear even once in your life.
I love him. So I was going through this pain, not like he was, but just like, oh my God. So there's three people that I was very close to. And then most of the other people that I knew. You know, I knew so many people. Fortunately, my mother and my stepfather have a great relationship, and they have for a long time. So I have that modeled. Like they were.
Okay, so move on to this one. This is obviously about weird relationship advice.
Psychopathic types, they're always the death of everything. Like, I'm seeing this come up on the right now.
All right, he's getting
He's
getting excited.
Status increase, reputation.
These agencies who were profiting off of him being famous. They didn't want that train to stop. I still, to this day, wonder if I would ever do that again, because the negativity that came my way from people that were fans of his was it's so overwhelming if you're paying attention to it. It's like, what did I open up? Like, ugh. Even though I knew it was necessary. Like, what? And that is also why people are negative, because they want to stop you from engaging in conflict that's going to hurt them. You know, so they try to hurt you as much as possible. So you're like hesitant to do it. I don't want to wade into those waters. Ooh, it's dangerous, filled with sharks.
Well, you could imagine, maybe, I think this is worth delving into in some depth. You could imagine that there's various ways of attaining status, renown, reputation. Status isn't exactly the right word because reputation is better, because you can have a reputation that you deserve, right? And so people do work for reputation, and all things considered, that's
No one cares about the minutiae of that differential there. Like, it's what a waste of time to be. Well, I mean, I should probably back up on that and qualify what I mean by reputation versus status, right? Because a reputation at the end of the day is something that could be like, who cares? Fucking get to it, Jordan.
relatable place, and that's right. It's right.
Right.
And so, but the problem is, and this is a really tricky problem, and you're touching on it, is that the reputation game can be gamed. Okay, so when your reputation rises, your serotonin levels rise.
Okay.
And that makes you less sensitive to negative emotion and more sensitive to positive emotion.
Okay.
So that's a really good deal. And what that also means is that there's a high psychological benefit to status increase, reputational increase,
Okay.
and a real cost to reputational decrease. So that's partly why people don't like losing face, for example, because their emotions dysregulate. Okay, so now the best way to play that game is to establish a genuine reputation. And the best way to do that, you've done this, by the way. I figured out this year in my lectures that I'm always trying to answer a question on stage. So that's a quest. And I'm bringing the audience along on a quest. And it's a real quest because I'm actually trying to figure something out, and I do that in real time. And that's a very different game. That's a very different conversational game than the status battle game. Yeah. Right? Because I could come on here.
Right, but like, okay, first off, I think it's a little inappropriate if you have paying fans who come to see your lecture, if you're just going to use that as a group therapy work-through session. You're like, I have things I want to figure out. I'm going to do it with you now. Let's all have some fun together. Well, can I learn something too, Mr. Peterson, doctor, sir?
I don't know if it would work, but I could come on here and I could try to show that I was smarter than Joe Rogan. Now, I've watched you, and that's a very difficult thing to pull off. But hypothetically, that could be my aim, and I could play gotcha questions, and I could lead you into places.
The problem is that wouldn't work because I'm willing to accept that you're smarter than me.
Oh.
First of all, I talk to a lot of people that are smarter than me, and I like it. It's enjoyable. I don't ever feel uncomfortable talking to people that are smarter than me.
Yeah.
I want to know some things that they can tell me on certain things. I want to educate myself. I want to see how their mind works. I want to be blown away. I don't want to compete with them intellectually. There's times in my life where I would have fallen into that trap.
Yeah.
I think that's what's
made. Well, I think that's also what's made you popular and a force for good, is that you are on a quest, and that quest, the consequence of that quest, if undertaken properly, is reputational enhancement. And people who can't or won't do that, they default to power games. And
I don't know. It feels like you're both just filleting each other. It's basically like, I want to position myself as somewhat of an authority and more intelligent than you. Well, I just want to establish that you are correct. You are somewhat of an authority and more intelligent than me, because I specifically seek out people who are more intelligent than me because I'm so confident in my intelligence and my ability to have conversations to learn from them. So I'm also great. You are also great. That's one of the reasons why you're amazing. And I guess we're both pretty amazing.
Part of it, and that's the default to power.
Right.
But it's worsened with social media.
Absolutely.
Because if you meet someone and they're playing a power game with you, you can just decide not to have anything to do with them anymore, or you can put a stop to it if you need to. But on social media, you can't, because they're distant from you, and they're often also anonymous. And so they can play power games to enhance their reputational status falsely with no consequences. And the social media is rife with that, and it's really a problem. Like, I think that virtualization has enabled the psychopaths.
Without a doubt.
Now, you might be thinking that Jordan Peterson right now is talking about libs of TikTok, because that would actually be a very valid, demonstrratable example of someone who basically tries to initiate stochastic terrorism towards minority groups to have violence enacted upon them to make them more terrorized and afraid. That would, again, using the anonymousness of the internet to accomplish these goals until, eventually Hire was exposed by Taylor Lorenz and Glenn Greenwald, I should add. But that's not who he's talking about. He's talking about his reply guys. He's talking about people who will quote tweet him and embarrass him online, and so they happen to be manifestations of demonic presence, not people who actually use anonymity on the internet to try and get people legitimately hurt.
Yeah, well,
without a doubt,
that's a terrible thing, because the psychopathic types, they're always the death of everything. Like, I'm seeing this come up on the right now. So imagine this. I've been working on a new theory of political psychopathology, and I like it quite a lot.
Is this where the term the woke right comes in?
Yeah. Well,
James Lindsay has been using the term woke right a lot to go after people. He's at a crossroads, like, I guess, a handful of conservatives who on one end are completely for vilifying and demonizing LGBTQ plus people and going after them, and then basically utilizing their credentials and platform to consistently give a lot of the far right ammunition to be able to pass legislation and target trans people, target gay people, target LGBTQ plus people. That's just like a thing they've been doing for a while. But now they're starting to live in the presence of Nazism and realize that there is actually full-blown authoritarian tendencies that Donald Trump is trying to enact, such as rounding people up without due process, not listening to the judiciary, ruling like a dictatorial tyrant, and specifically targeting the same minority groups that they've been giving all this ammunition for. And that's obviously a bit of a like, holy shit. The people who were saying that they were kind of Nazi-like are actually Nazis. This is kind of fucked up. Well, I'm going to say that I think, like, you know, I'm totally for the whole calling out of gender woke ideology and cultural communist Marxism and all that kind of stuff, anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and the like. But he wants to draw the line at you going into full-blown authoritarian fascism. I don't want to see and live through that. So I'm calling you the woke right now. And so this is this weird time where Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson, perhaps people, and he's Canadian, right? So he on the other end has to sit there as he's just like, oh, Donald Trump is the X-Men and all this kind of stuff. And Donald Trump's like, I'm going to take over Canada. So he's in a bit of a weird spot as well. They're all kind of now trying to do this, like, toe the line between the very far right groiper online internet crowd who are all for this shit right now. They're like, oh, this is so fucking base, bro. They're just taking non-white people and putting them into concentration camps, bro. It's everything we ever wanted, bro. We're going to take back the world. Soon we'll get our birthright back, bro. Like all that shit. They're off way on that end, and then there's the other side of the right who are just kind of like, oh, well, I don't know if I agree with the term Nazi.
Exactly right. So it isn't woke. That's not the issue. It's not exactly.
I think
one
what
level.
they're talking about is like similar types of behavior.
He is talking about that. Yeah, no,
but
what
it's
he's
just, woke just lets you clarify in your head, oh, it's like that.
Yeah, but the problem is...
It's like Antifa.
Yeah, absolutely. But the problem is that...
Do you hear the sentence that just left his like throat, and Jordan Peterson is just like validating every part of it? But again, when he says the woke right, what he means is it's a way for you to identify the thing that, like, you know, you're against, and then they're using those same tactics against us. So the woke right is the thing. Oh, no, of course. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, he's totally right. Yeah, that's true. The woke right.
That argument is predicated on the claim that the ideas are the problem, like the woke ideas, for example, on the right or the left. But that's not the problem. The problem is that 4 to 5% of the population, something like that, is cluster B, that's the DSM-5 terms, histrionic, narcissistic, antisocial, psychopathic, or they have dark tetrad traits. They're Machiavellian, they're sadistic. That's about 4%. Okay, so the question is, how do these people maneuver? And the answer is they go to where the power is, and they adopt those ideas, and they put themselves even on the forefront of that.
Right.
But the ideas are completely irrelevant.
Right.
All they're doing is they're the Pharisees.
Right.
They're the modern version of the Pharisees. They're the people who use God's name in vain, right? As they proclaim moral virtue.
Yes.
Doesn't matter whether it's right or left or
So if you want me to translate for you, essentially, if you call someone out on the internet, you are basically trying to cancel them, and they don't like call out and they don't like cancel. And so they then refer to you as the woke right for calling them out when you should not. That's all it is. You can try and relate it back to, qualifications of the DSM-5 and in any way you want to word this. But at the end of the day, other right-wingers are battling other right-wingers right now. The right are in power in the United States. The right control every fucking branch of government. And then it seems like they have an authoritarian leader who's going to be ignoring any, pushback that they might be getting. And at the same time, they have been positioning themselves for a long time as being counterculture when they never were countercultural. They never were those kind of people. They weren't the people who were rebels. They weren't punks. They were never that kind of shit. You cannot be upholding capitalism and wanting to barrel it towards fascism and also be punk. Right, but they were not in power because it was the Democrats and the neoliberals who were in power without realizing the right are also neoliberals. It has the word liberal in there, so it gets confusing and tricky for them.
Christian or Jewish or Islam. They studied the dark triad. These were people who originally studied psychopaths, and they moved into ordinary personality, so to speak, on the fringes. They showed that the non-criminal psychopaths, so the fringe cases, are Machiavellian. They use their language to manipulate. They're narcissistic. They want unearned reputation.
The left wasn't in power is kind of like the big thing here, right? Like the left was never in power. He's referring again to Democrats. He's referring to liberals. That's why the whole thing gets confusing. And it's liberal identity politics that really was at the centerpiece of all this. And it's why they're so mad. They were so mad that not only were identity politics entering into liberal political spaces, but corporate spaces as well. And again, this is not the same thing as improving people's material conditions and improving their lives, and actually making the working class stronger. It was never about that. It was always about performative politics, right? Identity politics. And because that was associated with liberalism, they felt that the liberals, aka the left, aka the communists, aka the Marxists, were in power the entire time. And now that the tables have turned, it turns out that people are using these same Machiavellian schemes on us, but they're coming from the right, which means they must be the woke right. And then you're caught.
That's what a narcissist wants. And they're psychopathic, which makes them predators or parasites. Okay, that's pretty bad, those three things. But they had to expand the nomenclature after a while because they found that they were also sadistic, which implied that if you're Machiavellian and narcissistic and psychopathic, you develop a sufficiently bad view of your fellow man that their undeserved pain is a source of pleasure to you. And that's what's being enabled online.
Yes.
Like, see, because we've evolved real specific mechanisms to
If you were narcissistic, parasitic, and psychopathic, you develop a pretty bad view of your fellow man. Words are fun.
That's things under control in face-to-face interaction. Lack of anonymity, for example, within a community. Psychopaths in the real world, they wander. They have to move from place to place because people can figure out who they are, and they're held responsible. They're particularly held responsible by men. But online, they escape from that. They escape from that protective.
And it's women?
They escape from that system of constraints, and they have free reign, and they can find other people like them very rapidly, and they can gang together. And so this is like, I can really see this starting to happen on the right. Like I've been tracking.
Yeah, they just can't take any form of criticism. That's it. That's what it's always been. At the core, at the centerpiece of all of this, if you want to take out the DEI, the woke, the CRT, the SJW, the PC culture, the PC police, all of that shit that's been going on for so long, they just don't want to call out. Or they feel that someone else trying to explain their own story is just like inherently calling them out. If someone's like, hey, I don't eat meat, and it's like, oh, bloody hell, what are you saying, that I'm some kind of demonic force possessed by the psychopathic, narcissistic Machiavellian? No, that's just me. You do you, bro. That's all there is to it. Or if, like, a black person's like, hey, by the way, I was racially profiled. Oh, bloody hell, are you saying all white people are racist? Are you trying to say that every single white person is actually a demonic Machiavellian force? No, I was not talking. This is not about you. Jesus Christ. I don't know. Maybe you could be a better person, though. That could be a start. Cancel culture. Here it is. The woke white. The woke white. Woo woo.
The woke white on the right for probably 4 years, something like that. Especially on the anti-Semitic side, because that's really where it reared its head first. And
why is that?
There's nothing more annoying than a successful minority. Right. Now that's part of it. I'm going to here. I must.
Hey, Rep. Hold on a second. I wouldn't mind doing.
Pause it.
Let's just go back. I want to hear where he's going.
They wander. They have to move from place to place because people can figure out who they are, and they're held responsible. They're particularly held responsible by men. But online, they escape from that. They escape from that protective. They escape from that system of constraints, and they have free reign, and they can find other people like them very rapidly, and they can gang together. Yeah. And so this is like, I can really see this starting to happen on the right. Like I've been tracking psychopathic behavior on the right for probably 4 years, something like that, especially on the anti-Semitic side, because that's really where it reared its head first. And
why is that?
There's nothing more annoying than a successful minority. Right. Now that's part of it. I'm going to here. I must.
I assume he's talking about people like Jake Shields, people who are deeply, deeply anti-Semitic and have been for a long time and have not been secretive about those beliefs. But I'm sorry, these are the people you're getting in bed with. I mean, you should probably look into the history of what were the groups the Nazis specifically targeted outside of Jewish people. They included LGBTQ plus people. And yes, a lot of the same people who spend all day railing against trans people are also people who are deeply, deeply anti-Semitic and spread anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. And a lot of them now have been the same people who try to say, well, I am both anti-Semitic and I'm going to do the anti-Semitic thing where I associate all the actions of Israel with all Jewish people. So I'm gonna do those both at once. So I'm just gonna do everything at once now. Now this is where Jordan Peterson is like, because there's nothing more annoying than a successful minority. That what? I don't know. I feel like you might be exposing yourself there, sir.
Get myself in trouble right away too.
Yeah, for sure.
Well,
this is a very real subject.
Well, so it's a real terrible subject.
It's interesting because if you don't criticize it enough, you're compromised. If you criticize, it's like when it comes to anti-Semitism, like it's one of those things where you can't separate. It's a religion, and it's also a race, and it's also a government. Mm-hmm. That's where things get weird. Right. And then there's also the concept of intelligence agencies and compromise that also gets attached to it. The manipulation.
You did it. You did the third one. It's also a government. The Jewish government.
manipulation of world markets and money, and there's a lot to unpack. And then there's regular Jewish people who have nothing to do with that.
Well, the Jews too they're very successful.
my God.
And so what you would expect from a purely statistical point of view is you'd expect them to be overrepresented at the extremes.
They're also a walled garden, right?
Meaning?
Meaning it's very difficult to join. They don't proselytize. They don't try to get you to join.
Right.
And they're all very tightly knit. They call themselves the Klan. They're all like locked in. The Jewish Klan, not KKK. The problem with that term has been compromised by the Ku Klux Klan. But I mean,
I love how immediately when he started this show, it's like, this is really hard to talk about. There's so much to unpack, and you really have to analyze it. You have to be careful what you say when we're talking about this. I mean, we ourselves don't want to spread anti-Semitism in our quest, if you will. We're doing a quest, right? In our quest to obviously, try and dispel some of the anti-Semitism that we're seeing on the right. But anyways, we got a lot to talk about.
in terms of tribe.
Well, community.
Yeah, community. They're very tight-knit in that regard. They stick together.
Well,
and
so-
if you understand the history, obviously, of Nazi Germany and of persecution in Eastern Europe, you have to. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, well, all these complex things are multidimensional. I mean, I watched your whole conversation with Douglas, and I thought you guys did a very credible job, all three of you, of navigating unbelievably choppy waters. So that's the first thing I'd like to say, because one of the things I was trying to figure out when I was watching that is, do I think I could have done a better job of any of you? And I certainly didn't walk away from it with that idea in mind. But then underneath all that, I thought there's a really unbelievably tricky problem here, and I think that's why it's made it poked up into. Well, you also set that conversation up, but it poked up and made itself manifest in that conversation. And the issue is, how do you identify the psychopathic pretenders? And it's even worse now, and then make a barrier, right? Now, the right was calling for the left to do that for decades, and they didn't, and they couldn't, and the left is not good at drawing barriers, partly temperamentally. The right is somewhat better, but there's no shortage of monstrosity there. And so then the question is, how do you draw the line? And that's kind of what I was, because I've been watching these right-wing, they're not right-wing, these psychopathic types manipulate the edge of the conservative movement for their own gain. And a lot of that's cloaked in anti-Semitic guise. There's plenty of anti-Semitism on the left too, by the way. So it's not unique to the right.
Well, particularly now.
Yes, particularly now. And so, you've let your curiosity guide you, your curiosity and your desire.
I mean, if you go by the definition of associating everything that Israel does with all Jewish people, which is itself an act of anti-Semitism, I can see why this is confusing for both of them. Jordan, this is your crew. You can't be hanging out with Nazis and having dinner with them all the time and having conversations with them all the time and not recognizing this is part of the package. Yeah, this is who they are. Oh, the fringe psychopaths on the right, and obviously I'm seeing just all kinds of strange anti-Semitism and all this kind of stuff. Well, yeah, because they're anti-Semitic. You're talking about a lot of people. Jake Shields, for example, if that's who he's referencing, he hasn't actually dropped any names yet, but if that's who you're referencing, yeah, those are people who hate Jewish people simply for being Jewish.
For knowledge, this quest, you've let that guide you as a podcaster, and by the way, I'm trying to work through exactly the same sort of thing. How do you know, given your radical increase in stature over the last 10 years, how do you know when your curiosity and even your skepticism about the fact that things aren't the way that people say they are, because that's certainly been demonstrated in the last 10 years, how should anyone decide what guardrails to put up? Like, what do you look for? Do you have a conceptual system?
You're the one being interviewed. Did you know that? I feel like half of this thing has been glazing.
Worked out for that? Like,
what do you mean? In what way?
Well,
Zachap, thank you very much for the rating party. Can everyone go to twitch.tv/Zachap? Give Zachap a follow back. Appreciate that. We're just in the middle of watching the new meeting of the minds, the high IQ brain discovery sessions of both Jordan Peterson and one Joe Rogan.
How do I look for in terms of people to talk to?
Yeah, because you have this insanely immense platform, and you're inviting people onto it. And, you said to Douglas, and I know this to be true, that you're not really thinking about the outcome exactly. You're thinking about, this is an interesting person to talk to, and I'd like to go on that quest. But then you have the additional conundrum. We're trying to work this out on the Daily Wire side of things too. Not to say that that's exactly the same situation. It's like, once you gain in reach and authority, then how do you know that, how do you take great care that the people you're talking to aren't, what would you say, eliciting or feeding a subculture?
Because you all hang out with Nazis. I just, wow, a whole bunch of them are finally coming to terms with this. It's just weird, I gotta say, because, you know, we bring on all the same guests, we talk to all the same people, we have friends in the Daily Wire, and then we have all these other people that we collaborate with, and from time to time, you know, there's certain figures we're supposed to avoid. I've heard of some Nick Fuentes guy. I don't really do shows with him per se, but, you know, I'm fine talking to some of his friends, and maybe some of his friends' friends, and then going on their podcasts, but it's just weird that now we're coming to a realization that a lot of them happen to have really racist beliefs. And how do you navigate that? Like, you know, because you're so good at it, Joe.
Sure, yeah, that's right. That hasn't got the proper aims. Like, I guess the legacy media probably worked that out by having people, mediators, right, and guests. And that was also back when we could rely on the structures of authority in some sense.
Wait, are you just also finally coming to the conclusion that in fact Joe Rogan needs to be held to a higher account because he has the same reach as legacy media? Not that he's ever going to call him out on it. Joe can do no wrong, but it's kind of one of those things where it's like, bloody hell, how do they work this out? And, you know, I mean, how do the TV stations prevent all of these Holocaust deniers from getting on there? And then, you know, one day I'll have a guest, and then the next day he's doing Zig Heils and stuff like that. And, you know, that Elon Musk, whoa, what is going on there, bucko?
Filter. And now we're in this helter-skelter world where everything is
The
up
legacy
for
media is
grabs.
the worst at that now.
Yeah, I know.
They're the worst
I
at
know.
that, which is fascinating. You know, it really is. It's really fascinating when you lose faith in a New York Times piece. You know, it's like you go like, well, this is bullshit.
Yeah.
I know this. I know what they're doing. I know
Yeah.
they're just, this is editorial
Growing
bullshit.
up is
And
hard.
that didn't used to be the case, I don't think.
No, it didn't.
But then I go back to like what I
Getting
learned
older.
about the Woodward, Bernstein, Nixon thing at Watergate. That was all essentially an intelligence operation. Have you ever looked into that? You know, I had
Some.
Bill Murray on the podcast, and Bill Murray said one of the wildest things. He read the first 5 pages of Bob Woodward's biography on John Belushi, Wired. He read the first 5 pages. He goes, "Oh my God, they framed Nixon."
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, no
He's
kidding.
like, what they wrote about my friend was so not true. It was so wild.
I just love how it doesn't matter. Like, that was enough for him to be like, oh no way. Oh, wow. That's incredible. That's a very, very loaded statement that he just made. You're allowed to push back. You're allowed to be like, well, I don't know. I don't know if that exonerates Nixon necessarily, but
Wildly off. He said John Belushi was a lightweight. John Belushi would have a couple of drinks and he'd be fucked up. He wasn't like a big partier. That time he did that speedball, probably the only time he ever did it in his life. But Woodward had him painted as this maniacal, off the rails, just drug-addled monster. And he knew that to not be true. He was very close to Belushi for a long time. And so he was like, oh my God, they framed Nixon. Then when I told him the whole story, you know, what Tucker Carlson had told me about Woodward being an intelligence asset, and then that was his first job ever as a journalist was Watergate, and that there's FBI guys that were involved in it and the break-in, and the whole thing was they tried to get Nixon out of there, the most popular president in the history of the country in terms of the vote, and they were successful.
are you serious? This is where Joe's at. Apparently Nixon was framed.
Successful. They got him out of there. And it's probably because, or likely because Nixon was very concerned with who killed Kennedy. And he wanted to find out. And he wanted to get that information out. And apparently he had been talking about it. I know who did it. And he was, you know, he didn't want it happening to him, obviously. And he knew it could. If you're a president, you know, a couple of guys ago, you know, just one of the most popular presidents, at least posthumously popular presidents. I know he's very polarizing while he was.
You know what's wild is that, like, when it comes to Nixon, there's so much like conspiratorial rabbit holes you could go down that actually are based in reality that would be interesting. I think your audience would appreciate them. I think they would have a very entertaining time listening to someone who actually knows the history of that period in the U.S. to be able to talk about it. When it comes to his innocence, I mean, one thing that actually is working less in Joe or Tucker Carlson's favor is the fact that he was extensively recording himself. There are things called the Nixon tapes. And outside of the pretty intense anti-Semitism and racism towards black Americans and the fact that that guy had one hell of a tongue, there's also the whole kind of like, you know, the guy was so deeply paranoid that he was actually generating a lot of the evidence against him. So you don't really have to go into the conspiracy territory. You can just play a handful of the times when he's actually pretty much admitting to the very things that he's accused of.
In office, but was shot in the head in the middle of Dallas. And you think that the government might have had something to do with it. Like that could fuck with your head.
That's interesting.
Obviously.
That's
Yeah, well,
a
and
neat
there's
thing
many
to talk
things like
about.
that. I mean, you saw the government website that came up 2 days ago about COVID.
Yes.
Okay.
Wild. wild
Yeah,
to see that.
that's
Wild
for
to
sure.
see
What are you
in
supposed to do
print
with that?
all the things that would have gotten you fired if you were a professor and you said them 4 years ago. You would have 100% got fired for espousing any of these ideas that turned out to be true. You would have gotten kicked off of YouTube. You would have gotten, there was a lot. There was a lot going on there, which is I feel so fortunate that
COVID broke
right
so
at the
many
height of
people's brains.
COVID was also when I had gone over to Spotify. Spotify is a Swedish company. It's different. They're different. They're much more rational, and they're not overwhelmed by this identity politics shit, and they aren't overwhelmed by our
It's your viewers, Joe. You're protected by being enormously popular. It's not necessarily just because it's like I can tell you firsthand. There are corporate decisions Spotify took right away, and they've taken many against you. And there was numerous cycles where Joe Rogan either had a ton of episodes suddenly deleted off the catalog because they didn't want the Alex Jones ones on there, and also just things like, hey, by the way, Joe, you got to come forward and apologize. You can't necessarily be promoting X or Y on your show. Or there's the whole N-word compilation that's doing the rounds right now. Can you kind of just acknowledge why it is that you're not a hardcore racist, because you really seem to have a lot of, racist statements in your past and people are talking about it, so maybe make a video about that. You could also bring up the fact that it's kind of weird you're consistently pushing misinformation related to a pandemic, a vaccine, and all this kind of stuff at a time when it's kind of crucial that people get important information and then tell it to other people, because we collectively have to work on this together. So that one's kind of fucked up, but yeah.
weird political binary system of good guy, bad guy, depending on which side you're on. And they were like, "What are you talking about? This is crazy. We don't censor our
the
rappers."
Swedes also didn't lock down.
Yes, they didn't lock down.
Right.
They were also like, "We don't censor our rappers."
And how did that fucking work out? I love when that's brought up. It's like, and by the way, they just never locked down. Well, they held off quite a bit in comparison to other countries, and then the numbers became so dramatic that they actually started imposing certain measures to try and reduce the amount of spreads that they were having. That yes, it was a bad experiment. It failed.
We don't tell the rap lyrics. Some of my favorite rap lyrics are horrendous, but it's just like my favorite movies are Tarantino movies. The dialogue is horrendous. It doesn't mean that these are horrendous people that are putting together this. Tarantino's a wonderful guy. He's fun to be around. He's great. I've had dinner with him, brought him to the comedy club. He's great. He's not a bad person, but he is an artist, and he's creating this thing. And this thing is going to show you aspects of humanity that you know to be true, but are horrific. That's the same with rap lyrics. It's the same with a lot of things. And Spotify's position was, we're not censoring. That's not what we're in the business of, promoting art. We sell art, and we're not interested in censoring
Sorry,
art.
are you referring to yourself as art? I'm basically a Quentin Tarantino movie for 3 hours live every day.
Essentially. And it turns out, luckily, we were all right. We were all correct,
No, you
and now
weren't.
the government shows it on their fucking website, which is crazy. Have you seen it, Jamie? Yeah. Pull it up, because it's bananas. And
this is so awesome that the conspiracy heads, the anti-scientific community, they have a president that represents them, that is willing to then validate all of their worst unscientific beliefs and keep playing into this wide conspiracy theory that the lockdowns are bad, masks did nothing, the Chinese developed COVID as a bioweapon to be released, lab leak theory is 100% true, all of it. It's on the official White House website now, so I mean it's a matter of fact.
Well, and
look at this lab leak.
Yeah, right.
Oh my god!
I know.
Holy shit! I can't believe this. It's on the web. Wow! And Trump's standing in the middle. Yeah, he's sandwiched in there. He's a little bit of the baloney in the middle there, just being all leaky like.
By the way,
lab leak: the true origins of COVID-19. Pretty wild, y'all.
I know that he would bring up the vaccines when he was on his rallies, and people would boo when he was on the campaign trail. People would boo, and I think he was confused by that. I think he's a little. I don't want to say he's out of touch, but there's too many things for him to be thinking about, for him to be paying attention to what people really think about the vaccines and vaccine injuries and mandates and just the psychological warfare that was played on the American people.
Oh shit, I'm going to skip over this because one of the few strikes I've gotten on my YouTube channel before was apparently for calling out a bunch of people who were doing COVID misinformation, and they were effectively able to weaponize the stream and say that I was spreading the COVID misinformation, which is just a complete abuse of the system, and one in which you would think that the appeal process would be able to see through, you can just write out an appeal. I'm very clearly criticizing someone spreading misinformation about COVID-19. That's the purpose of this, but then boom, yeah, too late.
Yes.
Right. And it also provides a perfect cloak for any amount of power maneuvering. It's I want to make your shower heads put out a needle spray so that you're cold all the time while you have a shower, while you're doing something you do every day that could otherwise be highly enjoyable.
I just randomly clicked into another part of the video, and I never thought I would arrive here, but here we are.
Why do I get to invade your life to that degree? Well, because the planet's at stake, Joe. And who are you to privilege your shower comfort, something that trivial, over the fate of the entire planet? Well, you can use that argument.
I also love his entire like processes for doing climate change denial is entirely attacking it from a comfort standpoint. Like, you want abundance, you want comfort. What, apparently you're not supposed to flush the toilet all the time? Yeah, that's kind of gross. What, do you want to take cold showers, not have plastic straws, not enjoy plastic bags? That's what they're asking of you. This is the world they're trying to do. They are literally trying to make us eat bugs. Have you heard about that? That's basically what they're doing. They're like, oh yeah, you can't enjoy meat anymore. You're going to have to eat bugs, bug bars. You're just going to squish a bunch of bugs and you fry it up on your frying pan. Enjoy that nightmarish spam. Yeah, that's what they're trying to do. So this is why I've told you before, the entire thing is just a Marxist plot.
Every single level. You know, Trump came out with this executive statement just a few days ago about shower heads, and everybody kind of laughed about that. And I thought, no, he has an eye for petty tyranny, right? For petty tyranny. And there's very little that's more petty than, well, I think the shower head example is a perfect one. Yeah. And then you also think, look, if they're willing to control your life at that level of detail, what are they not willing to control? It's like, you're concerned about my shower heads? Like we're out of water?
I don't know. I think a bigger issue is that like a lot of people can't afford rent. They don't have places to stay. Yeah, keeping a certain percentage of the population in entrenched poverty, which is something that you can dramatically alleviate through policies. I mean, the U.S. has demonstrated that. They cut child poverty in half due to a policy. If you can do that, that might be a great thing. Then more people could have bathrooms. And then if they had bathrooms, they could worry about the shower head and how efficient it is and whether or not there's a tyrannical government trying to prevent you from having all hot water by having a cold shower stream integrator. Like, I have no idea what the fuck he's talking about.
Which we're not at all. So what won't you control? So you think, well, the psychopaths are edge cases. They'll move wherever the power is. They find a narrative that can be used to strike fear in the hearts of people and to justify compulsion. They ally themselves with that belief claim, and then they ratchet themselves up status hierarchies without any true reputational validity, riding on that edge of fear and power. Right, right. I wrote an article, it hasn't been published yet, in the Telegraph, because I got hell a lot after one of our podcasts. You may know this, but...
The climate change stuff.
That's right. The whole bloody transcript was sent to the college as an indication that I was out of my wheelhouse. You know, and maybe I stepped a bit out of my wheelhouse when we had that discussion.
Yeah, you did. It was so ridiculous. You're one of the people who spreads the whole... They're trying to tell us... carbon-based life forms, that carbon is bad for us. You're one of those folks. Absolutely, it's out of your wheelhouse. What the fuck are you doing? Like, Jesus Christ. I'm also made up of atoms. But if another, of atoms assembled into form of rock and landed on me, I would die. We're mostly made of water. You're still gonna drown, Jordan. Like, what are you saying?
Because I'm not a climate scientist, whatever the hell that is, by the way, because you have to know a lot to be a climate scientist and an economist on top of that. So today I'm talking about something that's a lot more psychological. The climate apocalypse narrative is a social contagion that's driven by power-mad psychopaths who are hell-bent on using fear and compulsion to make sure everyone steps in line so that they can continue with their...
It's kind of shitty because they didn't, like, it's not working. Like, you know, even if you're saying that this is how he sees the liberals or this is how he sees the Democrats, this is how he sees them. They are basically power-mad psychopaths trying to use this whole fear-mongering over climate change to control us with their policies. Their policies are not dramatically reducing the rate at which the Earth is heating or the rate at which we're pouring carbon into the atmosphere. That's all accelerating. So it's almost as if all of their power-hungry, mad plans have no effect whatsoever, even when they are in total power, like in the case of Canada.
Acquisition of undeserved power.
It's also effective enough that the people that are underneath the power comply and do the job of the man for the man.
Yeah, well, that's the advantage of using fear and compulsion, right? It's like, well, I have to go along with this because my leaders who...
And yeah, I can just skip past this, but like all of this part is essentially going down to inconvenience. It's the same thing with COVID. Like, Jesus Christ, so many of their gripes are just rich ass people who are worth hundreds of millions of dollars in the case of Joe Rogan, sitting there being like, they try to control you, bro, by making you use plastic straws, and now we can't even have plastic bags. You know how inconvenienced that is to me? Like, it's the worst thing in the world, bro. Yeah, I mean, for COVID, they actually wanted us to like stay in our homes for prolonged periods of time. I know, stay in my mansion, bro. Like, do you know how wild that is? I'm supposed to sit here in a giant ass mansion, you know, doing whatever the fuck I want with my endless resources. Like, I'm being told that? No way, man. That's like, you know, they're trying to control us 1984 style.
Built up a certain degree of credibility are telling me that, you know, the apocalypse is nigh. And who am I to, well, first of all, question, because, God, there's a hard thing to figure out. And it sets the world straight. And that's built into the biblical story. It's right at its core.
Oh, they're still talking about it. Wow, I skipped like 30
Pause that
minutes.
thought. I'm going to use the restroom. We'll come back.
Yep.
We're back.
So it's great fun to
God.
believe. I never could get over the fact that they allowed me to teach. Like, it was just but the students loved my courses, and I was very diligent, you know, so I stayed in my traces, so to speak. And I wasn't a revolutionary for the sake of revolutionary argumentation, and I was teaching about totalitarianism and
you
great
were
evil, and so it was hard to make a moral case against me, and no one was really inclined to, you know, they were happy with my teaching. So
I also hate that all of this is based on this like completely false narrative that Jordan Peterson was some kind of hero speaking out against unjust censorship. Like, you know, one of the first people to ever give him a big stage platform was Sam Harris, who was outraged that apparently there was a bill that was passed in Canada that had forced you to use preferred pronouns, and that they were forcing you to say things like Z and Zer, but you refused and you stood your ground. Oh yeah, compelled speech, bucko, and he just goes off for the longest time. None of it's true. He's just literally, his entire origin story is a lie. It was a lie from the jump, and everyone just ate it up. Everyone from libertarians to liberals to centrists to right-wingers, everyone was just like, oh my God, this is compelled speech. He's being forced to use pronouns in a way that doesn't agree with the way I see the world. This is insane. People will be arrested in Canada. And it's like, that never happened. What happened is gender got included into the list of classifications that should be protected by the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, as you shouldn't be able to do a genocide against people based on their gender. I don't think that's a controversial thing, but no, listen to Jordan Peterson tell it, and it sounds like he is on some mythical quest to defend the speech. And he's like, I refuse to call a he, a she, a she, a he, or either of them a Z or a Zer. I will die before I do that. No, but no one's making you do that. I mean, cool story. I'm glad that's something that's really important to you, and you've made your case that this is something that you are never going to do. You're not being asked to do that. Oh, and they're going to prevent me from teaching my course unless I call every student Z or Sir. You could call your students by their names. You could avoid this issue in its entirety. You see, that's the thing. You don't have to substitute a noun for the pronoun. You just go forward, call all your students by their names if you want to, or refer to them as students, because that's what they are. You're students. You could just be like, hello, class. Boom. You haven't broken any laws there.
And as were the students. And I had a clinical practice, which was quite extensive. But then when I first started to lecture much more broadly, we rented a theater, and I did a series on Genesis. That was the first foray out into the public space. Genesis. And it sold out. Well, that was when I started to encounter pain, I would say, at a crowd level. And that was rough, Joe. Because I'm pretty good at getting people to open up to me right away. I mean, I learned that as a clinician, you know. And to have thousands of people do that.
It's that time. Who had bingo? I think you're way past the due date on when the event was supposed to transpire, but I believe we're finally there.
That's pretty rough. Now, it was good. It was a good thing, like all things considered, because people would tell me how miserable they were, how discouraged, and how sidelined, and often how bitter, how addicted, how imprisoned, rough stories, and then tell me how much they had improved. But that was also, there was a tragic element to that, because it didn't take that much, you know, to tap them into the right orientation. And so there was sadness in that, to see all these people who were demoralized, thousands of them, and then to see how that could be rectified and yet hadn't been. That was rough. I'm sure that was what, there's many things that made me sick. I had a pre-existing condition that was autoimmune, but seeing all that, that was pretty rough. But knowing that it was possible to rectify it, well, there's nothing better than that. Like, you know, wherever I go now, it's so interesting. Wherever I go now, I'm among friends. It's very strange. And I have security people, and they keep an eye on me, and all the interactions I have with people are positive. And I always take...
Yeah, you literally have people who pay vast sums of money to go meet you in VIP rooms. You tour the world, you sell out stadiums, you have people who spend hundreds of dollars for tickets, and then if they spend thousands of dollars, they get to enter a room and talk to you. Oh, you'd never believe how positive it is. Every single one. They have nothing but nice things to say, you know? It's unbelievable.
Time for people, you know, because well, if they've been positively impacted by something that I've read or said, and they're trying to get their lives together, it's like, how about we encourage that? Right? Because more of that would be real good. And if we had enough of that, then more of that would be real good and real necessary.
Yeah.
Awesome. He's just like, again, he's one of the fucking people turning just unbelievably high quantities of men into very, very angry, profoundly angry people who are consistently getting them mad at all kinds of things. But the Dragon of Chaos, make no mistake, is usually a woman. It usually goes back to mother. It usually goes back to the fucking the hairbrush she cannot ever acquire. Like at the end of the day, touring the world and pretending, and this is why it's like people make fun of him not for being a man showing his emotions or being vulnerable, because you cry over the fact that you were like literally ruining people's lives and you think you're a hero for it. Oh, so many vulnerable men come up to me all the time and tell me they can't believe the way I changed their life. Now because of the 12 rules, they refuse to speak to women. They refuse because women are manipulating them, and it's so beautiful. It's like, yeah, great. You've ruined thousands of people's lives. You've made them miserable, and you've made yourself so wealthy through the process. Look how rich I am. Look how many books I've sold. Look how many tours I'm on.
And so,
and good for everyone too.
Hey, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, that's that abundance. It's like, you got your act together,
abundance.
great. That'll be real good for you. Be great for your girlfriend. Be great for your kids. Be great
the
for your
world.
community. Absolutely. And
Yeah.
it's, well, you know, the Christian ethos, the emphasis is redemption one soul at a time. Well, I'm a psychologist, you know. That's what I think. One person at a
You
time.
almost sound like Miss Piggy. Shit. I'm getting them mixed up. I'm fusing my
In
my
trouble at my
references.
shows is decreasing. And partly that's because many of the guys who come, generally with their wife and often with a child, have put themselves together. And,
Yes.
and then they're happy about that. And they tell me the story. And so that's great. Like, there's nothing better than traveling all around the world and
Oh, it's incredible, you know? I sell at these stadiums, I make millions of dollars, and then in the VIP rooms where people spend thousands of dollars to meet me, they get to show off the nuclear families that they are proud to show me. And I'm assuming that there's only really one combination that anyone would want to present to him, right? Like, you're not going to get two dudes with their, like, adopted child in there being like, oh, Jordan, your books were revolutionary to us. It really helped us find clarity. We pet cats now. We don't do anything that our child would be ashamed of. We do the 12 rules for life. We are mapping our meaning. Let me tell you, all right? We are avoiding the Dragon of Chaos. And hey, you know how we completely avoided the Dragon of Chaos? Turns out we're both homosexuals, and we don't actually have relationships with women at all. And so in that case, I don't have to deal with mother. This is just father. It's just two daddies. So this is awesome, right? You love this. This is we're doing exactly what you want.
having people come up to you and say that they weren't doing so well
Right.
and that their lives are way better now, and thank you.
Yes, that's
Like,
beautiful.
That's a good deal.
That's a great
That's a good deal.
Those are my favorite stories that I hear from people that listen to the podcast. They're like, I've listened to the podcast, I lost 60 pounds, I started working out every day, I'm much healthier, I'm drinking a lot of water, I'm taking electrolytes and vitamins, and just my mental health has improved because of the daily exercise, I'm a different person,
Yeah.
I'm on the right path.
Yeah, well, it's so that's very interesting too, that the fact that that's actually, you said those are the best stories that you can hear.
love those stories.
Well, it shows you something about non-hedonistic motivation. Like,
By the way, you can achieve that same effect without hating women. You don't need to add hating women to that equation. It is true that if you eat better, if you have a healthier lifestyle, if you exercise more, if you have more social interactions with people who are lovely and respectful to you, it will improve your mental health. You will feel better. You will be stronger. You will be faster. And the more you do it, the healthier you will feel. All of that is true. You just don't need to incorporate the rest of the bullshit. You also don't need to be forcibly a Christian to be able to enjoy any of those things either. You don't need to hate women. You don't need to hate minorities. You definitely do not need to be fearful of trans people to enjoy all the benefits from the things that they're mentioning that are very, very commonly expressed because they are generally very good advice for anyone to follow.
imagine,
Sites?
sure, why not? It was a storehouse of unguarded value.
Hmm.
You know?
Without any religious principles.
Well, also, yeah, there's that too, and,
Yeah.
and with no real gatekeepers. You know?
Right, right,
So,
right.
like the parasite problem is a very deep problem. So I can even give you an example of that. This is a hard one, but I'll try. In the Pinocchio movie, this also happens in Jonah, the story of Jonah. Remember,
But no,
Geppetto ends up in a whale. It's like, what the hell? There's no explanation for that in the story. It's like he's out looking for Pinocchio, and now he's in a whale. Well, a whale is a giant carcass, right? And so when something dies, its spirit is then embedded in a carcass. That's a good way of thinking about it. That's why Pinocchio has to go into the belly of the whale to free Geppetto and finish his transformation. When things deteriorate, right, you have these carcasses lying around with their dead spirits. The spirit of what gave rise to them is still inside there. And the job is to go into the carcass and to revitalize the spirit that produced it and not to parasitize it. Right.
Boy, I don't know how you got that out of Pinocchio.
Oh man, finding that would have been a needle in a haystack. You would have had to watch for 2 hours, 36 minutes, and 24 seconds to get to that moment in beautiful history. But that is, oh, that's an all-timer there. That one's especially amazing because you can tell at this point, I think Joe is at least like 4 or 5 glasses deep, maybe 3 blunts. So he is sailing, he's coasting. We're nearly at the tail end of this one, right? Like you can almost put a bow on this episode, and then all of that just happens so fast and furious. I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. I have to wait. Sorry, whales, carcasses. No, but you understand, right? You understand what I mean here, Geppetto. That's one of the reasons why.
No.
Beautiful.
Well, I try to follow
you on this one. I'm like, wow.
Beautiful.
Geppetto ends up languishing in the whale.
Right.
So imagine that there's a spirit in the universities that gave rise to these great storehouses of value. And that spirit has disintegrated, and now it's inside the storehouse. That's a good way of thinking about it. It's inside the storehouse. Your job as someone who wants to become real is to go into the storehouses of value that have been bequeathed to us by the past and to discover and revitalize the spirit that gave rise to them, not to parasitize them.
And when they parasitize
They
them,
strip them to their bones, and there's nothing left.
and they do it obviously, right? There's plagiarism, there's all these different, and all that
False
stuff.
scientific papers.
Yes,
Yeah,
and all that
everything
stuff
gets gamed.
all that gets swept under the rug because the people that are doing it are part of the protected class.
Yeah.
So they protect the parasites. Like, this is my lamprey.
Yeah.
Like, don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all
This is
upside
my-
down.
Like the woman from Harvard, they fired her, but they gave her an equal paying job.
It could also
Right.
be, Joe.
So that's
and might as well get in
inverse
trouble for this, too.
oppression.
Let's go.
That's
Well,
obviously why.
Because women are
white men
more
get it the worst.
agreeable. They're more prone to manipulation by psychopaths because their primary ethos is nurturing.
Yeah.
For a naive woman, every victim is a baby. It's like, fine, 90% of them are victims. You could even say that about criminals. You go to a run-of-the-mill prison, and there's going to be people in there, and you heard their lives, you think, oh my God, no wonder.
Right.
And then there's another core group that's like, oh, I see who you are. You're
a whale.
If I saw
Geppetto.
if I saw inside your skull for 5 seconds, I'd have post-traumatic stress disorder. I'd never recover. Right? Those people don't exist. It's like,
Yeah, they don't-
yes, they exist.
Yeah, they exist.
Yeah, and they're very good at crying like infants. Right. And then the mother.
I don't know. I feel like the moments of self-reflection are not very strong here.
The naive mothers come flooding out. The women dominated the universities from the 1960s onward. It's like, in come the parents.
You don't have to just agree, man. You can be like, this is just weird nonsense, sir. What? Women's primary motivating mechanic is nurturing, and so they all want to nurture, which is why they're so agreeable, which is why they're taken advantage of, which is why like 90% of them are stuck in the nurturing, which is why if we go to prisons and we talk to prisoners, you'd realize that some of them, wow, they might have like, you know, one hell of a story for you, but then there's other ones, like they belong in there. Know what I'm saying? All tracks, all checks out, sir.
Parasites, and they're enabled. And what are
One
they
of the
enabled by?
fascinating things to me is when parasites are confronted and they laugh. Like one of the things about academic parasites, when you challenge their beliefs,
That's contempt.
You don't know what you're talking about. I saw this with the anti-Semitism on campus thing, when these women were confronted by these statements like "death to the Jews" on campus, and whether or not this is hate speech. And I saw it with I believe it was Josh Hawley with the woman he was saying.
What the fuck are you talking about? Universally, if you're talking about the pro-Palestinian protesters, they were not the ones carrying those signs or saying those slogans. They were actually the group calling out the people carrying those signs and saying those slogans. A lot of those were internal instigators who were actually trying to make viral clips for people like Joe Rogan on the internet to react to.
Some women can give birth, and some men can give birth as well. Like some men have period. Like this kind of like, and I guess this line of questioning is very transphobic and opens people up to violence. With a laugh, with a laugh and a smile, a diminishing of your position by mockery.
It's contempt. Yeah.
When what they're saying doesn't make any fucking sense to anybody rational, but they're so embedded in this system that they really believe that they have the kind of control over Congress that they.
again, like all of this just comes back down to a slight discomfort, just slight annoyances. Did you have to wear a mask? I'm not doing that. That's totalitarianism. Okay. Did you have to learn a new fact? No, I'm not going to do that. That's you are restricting my speech. Oh, okay. Sorry. Did you want to do a health measure to basically prevent a pandemic from killing old people? No, I don't want to stay in my mansion. I don't like the idea that I can't leave, even though I'm not going to be leaving today because I'm just spending all day in the giant mansion I have. But I don't want to have to always do that. I'd like the choice. So not doing that one either. And what are you trying to tell me, that there are new understandings of how sex, sexuality, gender, all that kind of stuff works, and we have way more information on it? No, I'm not learning any of that either. I'm going to call you a crazy person.
Have over their classmates. This is like standard behavior for them, mocking and dismissing other ideas that are counter to theirs.
Right. Well, and there's plenty of reward for that disseminated in the universities.
Yes.
Right? And so that's part of their...
How do you fix that?
With
Or
Peterson
can you?
Academy.
Yeah.
No, I'm dead serious,
I believe
man.
you. I believe
Look,
you.
It's not like I'm...
Peterson Academy. Good plug, by the way. Just came out of nowhere, but that is how you fix the system. An uncredited university run by Jordan Peterson that actually doesn't give you any certification for any real job, but you can certainly hold up a piece of paper that shows that you are someone who hates women and doesn't have a lot of money. That's what the Jordan Peterson certificate will grant you. And then you can go up to an employer and be like, so what are your credentials, sir? I actually attended Jordan Peterson University. Well, thank you. There are no positions available. What? Yeah, but you said you had none for people of your qualifications specifically, because there's nothing you can offer the world outside of being really angry. Yeah, no, we're not. We make doors. We don't just hate women all day online. That's not what we do for a business. We do, again, manufacture doors. So I just don't know how that's going to help right now. But I mean, neat. What was that like? You must have got some cool courses by Brett Weinstein, Andrew Tate. A whole bunch of random people on the Dave Rubin. Did he teach you a thing or two? Yeah, there's an academic that you can trust.
Don't let this happen to you. Go to serfscoffee.com to order the only end-to-end owned indigenous coffee company that delivers blood-free, conflict-free, and cruelty-free beans right to your door. 0% of people who drink serfscoffee.com have exploded spontaneously. By ordering right now, you get 10% off plus free shipping, and it's the best way to enjoy delicious coffee while not exploding. That's serfscoffee.com, serfscoffee.com.
Thank you so much for watching, everyone. This video wouldn't be at all possible without the financial support of all the people whose names you see on the screen right now. And if you want to unlock secret bonus episodes, content that we can't post anywhere else, or get the videos early before anyone else gets to see them, please go on to patreon.com/theserfs. For as little as $1, you can help support this channel and help make more videos like this possible. Our executive producers are Anna Loves Riley, Adrian McCarthy, Bobby Lasers, Cheryl Alvarez, Comrade Junkie, Doug Caddy, Everything Important, Garrett Sandoval, Hagbard Saline, Jimmy Sombrero, Multimondi, Omni, Political Papi, Preston Kroll, Quiet 185, Richard Boehm, Riley and Anna, Roller Dragon, Cernicus, Stellar Gwyn, Sebastian Demel, Tigwick, Trav, and Words Greenwood. And also, it wouldn't be possible without all the names you see on the screen right now. Again, if you want to help produce this content, it's only made possible through the funding of our patrons. Head on down to patreon.com/theserfs. That's patreon.com/theserfs.